And the reason why these two proteins are so important is they are the first line of defense in our immune system because they're keeping iron away from the pathogens. I think it's actually okay where it is.
Okay.
What you don't want it to do is get above the range.
Okay, like 15 is the cutoff, yeah.
When it gets above the range, you know you've got someone who's struggling to mature their red blood cells.
Okay.
Maybe we should spend more time making sure we understand what the truth is. And I think there's enough signs of disinformation and deception that it's time to really question them. And the symptoms of copper deficiency are virtually the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people may have heard of the fact that B12 has an intrinsic factor.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah, and in this video, Morley Robbins is going to go through a set of labs. So I ordered the Morley Robbins panel or the full Monty, but I also had lots and lots of other labs, and he very kindly went through everything and explained it in lots of detail. And I think it'll be very helpful for people to start to be able to investigate their health, especially stuff like iron and copper, where most people, no disrespect to the medical profession, have got no idea how to order these panels or even read them. To start with, Morley just goes over a little bit of what we went through in part one, and then the rest of the podcast is all about labs. If you're interested in learning more about hormones and other labs, I have a hormone workshop, and if you use code COPPER, it'll give you a 15% discount. Welcome back to the channel, Morley, for part two. So if you haven't watched part one with Morley yet, I suggest you do this because we've gone through everything in very simple, basic terms. And I got a huge amount of value from it, even though I've read Morley's book as well and listened to other podcasts with him. So what are we going to talk about in part two? And maybe just give a little brief sort of summary of where we're at based on part one for people who are going to watch it later, but want to watch this one first.
Well, I think we were going to dig a little deeper, but we were also going to talk about some of your lab numbers, which would be kind of fun for people to hear about, because I think people, as you said, seem to respond to that. What came to light for me yesterday, and I've been at this for 15 years now, was sort of a bombshell, understanding of light versus dark. And we know we're in this, apocalyptic time, and good versus evil, and we're trying to make sense of it. And one thing that we do know is that as we age, we accumulate iron. That's very well documented. But the first two articles that I found about iron accumulation in the brain that was documented by physicians and scientists was 1922 by two separate German physicians, Dr. Spatz and Dr. Mueller. And they were just documenting their research on autopsies of brains that have iron accumulation. And a couple of years later, there was again, 1924, so that's 100 years ago. I think, what did they know back then, right? They know a lot. They absolutely knew a lot. And the article from 1924 was about iron accumulation and Parkinson's. And I'm sure that there are many people that have heard of Parkinson's. They just say, well, it's a disease. Well, it's not really a disease. It's a situation of basically what I think it is, it's a variant of hemochromatosis. It's so much iron is accumulating in the body, and it affects the nervous system. The people with Parkinson's have the highest concentration of rusty ceruloplasmin. So again, that's the copper protein. And when it gets rusty, it doesn't work right. And so people with Parkinson's have this very elevated expression of oxidized ceruloplasmin, but they also have a movement disorder, right? They have tremors. And this is from
Does iron concentrate for whatever reason more in the substantia nigra, or does it oxidize the substantia nigra preferentially?
absolutely does. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's great. I'm thrilled that you are tracking. And so the three highest copper centers in the brain are the substantia nigra, hippocampus, think Alzheimer's, and then the choroid plexus, which is where cerebral spinal fluid is made. You cannot make spinal fluid without copper. Absolutely essential to have that in the mix. And within the substantia nigra, there's 980,000 neurons. How do they figure these things out? I don't know, but that's the recognized number. And within each neuron of the substantia nigra, which is Latin for mostly black, within each neuron, there's 2 million mitochondria.
I was just about to ask, what is there in those regions? Because there's obviously lots of melanin in the substantia nigra, but there would be lots of mitochondria, because for people who didn't watch part one, copper is really important for making water at complex 4. So is it wherever the mitochondria are at, the copper wants to be at?
Absolutely. And so we have 40 quadrillion mitochondria in our body. It's a lot. It's about 500 mitochondria per cell, but within the substantia nigra, it's 2 million mitochondria. And what is the formal diagnosis of Parkinson's? When 2/3 of those neurons are no longer functioning. And when they don't function right, what they're doing is they're oxidizing, they're rusting dopamine, and dopamine is what regulates our movement. So when the dopamine gets rusting, it causes those tremors that is so characteristic of people with Parkinson's.
Oh, what's the name? So that means that it's like the dopamine it turns into something else that's an oxidized form of dopamine, or an oxidized neurotransmitter, or does it just get broken down? Because this is a kind of, yeah.
It does get oxidized.
Mm-hmm.
It's a variant of dopamine that has been altered by the oxidative stress from the iron.
Because doesn't the process to make dopamine, you actually use a copper enzyme? There's a tyrosinase which uses copper, and I think it's an it gets oxidized, but it's basically oxidized and it's gone too far. It's like when you're trying to make alcohol, you miss the point and make acetic acid. The reaction's gone too far. So it's basically the dopamine's gone off, I suppose, in sort of simple terms, and it's no longer useful.
That's exactly right. And see, the thing is, both copper and iron will oxidize things. Copper does it in a positive way. Iron does it in a negative way. And that's what people need to understand, is that copper is really our friend. Iron, not so much. But we have a lot of iron in our body that needs to be regulated, because iron does not regulate itself. It's like a 4-year-old with a hammer. And you don't give your child, you don't give your 4-year-old a hammer and then go next door and have a cup of coffee with your neighbors. You wouldn't do that. And so copper is the regulatory mechanism for iron in the body. And it's in the literature, but you've got to know what you're looking for. It's not going to be in the headlines. It's not going to be a bulletin board saying, here's the latest and greatest truth. Copper regulates iron. The system is not going to give us that kind of a hint.
But also the other important thing is aluminium is, if you say to people Alzheimer's, say someone like my mum's level, they will say, oh, isn't it aluminium that it goes at the center and attracts amyloid or whatever it might be, because we've got the sort of amyloid side. But again, when you say to people it's iron in the brain that's causing these, they've been told it's aluminium. And also I think people have implicated copper as well as being the center of it. Say if there are multiple reasons for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but for the sort of aggregation side, the Tau protein and the amyloid, there's sometimes you need a nice positively charged atom at the center. So is that not correct then about the aluminium, or is that something else that just piles in because the iron started the problem?
Iron started the problem.
Right.
And I'm not in any way challenging Dr. Exley. He's brilliant. And he's Mr. Aluminum. I'm sure you know of him in the UK. But his thesis is sound. But I think iron is the predecessor problem. And there are very few scientists that will put the spotlight on iron.
And also, this has been building up for a long time, because I think once you've lost, you can have 20% of your dopaminergic system left and still function. It's like type 1 diabetes. And then once you cross over that threshold, but what I think is really important here is these Parkinsonian symptoms could be building up for 40 or 50 years beforehand. And if you're saying iron is at the root of the mechanism, it's going to be silently creating this problem, and people can intervene early once they know, okay, if we get the iron, we can stop whatever else, the aluminium and all the other factors that potentiate the problem.
Right. And one of the things that Dr. Exley has done a beautiful job of, I think it was in 2013, he really separated wheat from chaff between who's really causing the Alzheimer's problem. Is it aluminum? That's how we say it here in the States.
Oh, yes, fine.
That's okay. Aluminum or copper. Everyone wants to blame copper. And he does a masterful job of saying copper's not the bad guy. Aluminum is. But I think aluminum is being affected by the buildup of iron in the brain tissue. That's really what's happening.
Because I think that's a really interesting subject, because when it comes to iron building up in different tissues, because we're going to start talking about ferritin and labs and hemoglobin and blood shortly, if you'd maybe want to say, where does iron like to accumulate where it shouldn't, and where is it supposed to be, and whether we can act, because I think from going through your work and labs and things, we have to infer the location of iron based on certain labs, but we can get an idea that it's accumulated where it shouldn't be. But how would people, navigate this of iron being where it's supposed to be, working properly, and where it's not supposed to be and hurting us?
So iron is the waiter, quintessential waiter, carrying oxygen on the way in, carbon dioxide on the way out, allegedly. And
yes,
what's the terminal destination for iron and oxygen? It's the mitochondria. And when iron gets to the mitochondria, it needs to be recycled. It's got to be turned back into heme and or iron sulfur clusters. Those are both copper-dependent functions. If copper's down, then the iron is going to accumulate in the mitochondria, and the energy loss will build. And there's different models for mitochondrial energy loss. You can have a 40%, 60%, 80%, or 96% energy loss, depending upon how much iron is accumulating in the mitochondria. So it's just, people don't realize that iron is our friend and foe, but what it really needs is someone to regulate it. And this is not well understood. And so the important point about the accumulation of iron, because you were alluding to it with your reference to melanin. Well, melanin is the pigment that serves many, many different functions. I have an amazing study that I'll be happy to send to you by Berg and Berg from 2023, talking about a new hypothesis of what's causing all this neurodegeneration. And their thesis is it's melanin gone awry, where the melanin can't do its job completely. That's what's leading to this dysfunction that we're seeing in neurodegeneration. But in 1924, what they were commenting on is that within the substantia nigra, there were two components. There's something called the pars compacta and the pars reticulata. Well, the pars compacta is the darkest tissue in the substantia nigra. And it's dark for a reason, because it's able to attract the metals and make sure that the body doesn't, that the brain tissue doesn't get affected by that iron. And so back in 1924, there was no iron accumulating in the pars compacta. It was all accumulating in the pars reticulata. Well, what's the difference between compacta and reticulata? Reticulata had no color. Compacta was dark, very dark. And now, if you fast forward 100 years, what you find is that the pars compacta is in fact accumulating all the iron, especially within Parkinson's. And there's no mention of the reticulata here. I'd never seen that. I'd never seen that word addressed in any article in the contemporary literature, but it was showing up in 1924 when they were really studying Parkinson's. And the reason why they were doing this is there was an epidemic of Parkinson's because of an infection that was spreading through Europe. And they were trying to connect that infection with the Parkinson's that was affecting brain tissue back 100 years ago. Absolutely riveting information. But here we have no mention of pars reticulata. And now in the contemporary literature, the compacta is accumulating iron. Well, what is that telling us? Compacta is no longer dark. It has the name substantia nigra, mostly black, but it's not the right color. And I think we may have touched on this in our earlier talk, but there's a very important organ in our body called the spleen. And I regard it as the hypothalamus of the body. That's how important I think it is. And it's supposed to be a vibrant purple, like an eggplant. And I had one of my students as a surgeon, and when I was talking about this, he said, I need to point something out to you. I said, what's that? He said, I've never seen a purple spleen. And so when an organ loses its color, it loses its integrity. It loses its function. It loses its energy production. And that's the problem we've got worldwide is people's integrity, their organ integrity, their physiology integrity is being lost because of a loss of copper. Can't make energy right, can't make color right, can't connect things right. And all of these and quite a few more are all copper dependent. And
Oh yeah,
it's all the literature, but it's not easy to find.
Yeah, we did talk about this in the last podcast about how melanin and copper color everything in the body from lips to eyes to, but the idea of a purple spleen, that's kind of superb. But it does make sense because it's like a rainbow sort of on the inside as well as sort of colors on the outside. So when it comes to iron accumulation, we've kind of gone through the brain, and that's sort of very serious. And it's not just people with Parkinson's, it's everybody, including young people. Because in the last podcast, we talked all about iron supplements and the RDA being skewed, and then plenty of labels of foods with, I found some cereal with 16 milligrams of iron per bowl. So, we went through all.
I bet it was per serving, not per bowl. I bet it was
Yeah.
a half a serving. So who has a half a cup of cereal?
Yeah, exactly.
No, 2 cups. So that's 64 milligrams of iron by the time you fill up your bowl with the cereal.
Oh, absolutely. And I noticed that they didn't know that 1%'s the RDA. So even though things I found that said, 2 milligrams of iron per, it was like a peanut butter keto cup. It's only half your daily allowance, whereas actually 2 milligrams, you've already overdosed times 2. So I just found iron in all sorts of things. I mean, it's in the previous video, but also when it comes to iron accumulation, the spleen is important. But what about the liver? Because I'd imagine that being a great big factory can get blocked up with unbound iron and affect thyroid hormone conversion, like T3 to T4, all sorts of things. So is the iron a sort of center, the liver a center of where the iron can accumulate as well?
Absolutely. It's going to accumulate in the spleen, it's going to accumulate in the liver, heart, pancreas, kidneys, brain. It's going to accumulate wherever it can.
Right.
But within the liver, you're not only affecting the copper metabolism, but as you just noted, thyroid function is going to go out, the detox functions go out. And no one's thinking about the fact that, well, my copper level in my food is low, which means my iron level is going to go high in my liver. It's well established in the literature. There are dozens of studies that have confirmed this. So iron's building in my liver. I'm not thinking about that. I just don't feel right. I'm not detoxing. And it is the fastest growing liver condition is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as you probably know.
And then people think it's alcohol, or they buy liver detoxes, like which are plants and bitters and castor oil packs. And I've tried to tell people it's the iron. You need to get that out.
Exactly. There's
Yeah.
three factors that contribute to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease: lack of copper, lack of retinol, vitamin A, too much iron. And it's well established in the literature. And so that people are not mindful of that. And most practitioners don't know that. And here's the conundrum. Why do they call it non-alcoholic?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's fructose, high fructose diet. Fructose becomes ethanol as soon as it gets broken down. And that ethanol becomes sorbitol. Guess what sorbitol does? It chelates copper. And it then allows iron to build in the liver tissue. And this has been very well documented by Rick Johnson and his research teams around the world. He's got one in Korea, one in Japan, and then, of course, here in the States at the University of Colorado.
But back to sorbitol, that's used as a bulk sweetener as well, isn't it? So can that chelate copper as well?
Yes, it can.
Okay.
Yeah, run the other way with sorbitol. And here's the insanity of it. Mannitol is a very graceful and important sugar that's almost impossible to find now, but sorbitol is everywhere. Fructose is everywhere. And so it's just the system is stacked against us.
Okay. So in terms of these levels of copper and iron, I'm sure you've had this a million times more than me. People will send you one or two labs like ferritin and expect you to interpret everything based on that. So do you want to walk people through? So, okay, people have got symptoms. We went through last time about foods. If people have been eating cereal and not reading the label or taking iron supplements, this is a strong indication there could be a problem. So how would you go about investigating this on a biochemical level with tests?
Well, we have what's called the full Monty iron pill. And here in the States, you can order it from a specific patient-directed website. But in Australia, in UK, in Europe, there are different ways to do this. And you shared with me your results, which are very close, if not identical, to what we do within the full Monty. Do you want me to walk people through?
Yeah, sure. Because actually, I think I found the full Monty, and then I used Ultra Labs and Quest, and then it was pretty much it pretty much. And sometimes it offers you like an alternative. But for people listening in the UK, I've actually found labs which can do the things which I got anyway. It's just inconvenient because you have to order everything from slightly different places, but it is worth it. So yes, should we go?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm just going to take them in order that they appear in the email that you sent me.
Because I've also got like loads more labs. So if there's something that you'd need, I've got that as well. I want to thank my sponsor, Lightwater Scientific, who helped me deliver free valuable information to you and also allow me to have great guests on this channel. Lightwater Scientific produce the purest and most deuterium-depleted water in the world. Depleting or lowering your deuterium has numerous health benefits, from better metabolic health, more energy, greater resilience, less brain fog, increased physical performance, enhanced healing, and healthier mitochondria. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, also known as heavy water, because it's bigger and heavier than regular hydrogen. Even though deuterium makes up only 0.02% of hydrogen, it's found everywhere. Deuterium is a burden to your body because it interferes with the intricate chemical reactions that occur by slowing them down. Deuterium is kryptonite to your mitochondria, and we need healthy mitochondria to produce energy. There's over 60 years of scientific research on the negative effects of too much deuterium on health, and also the positive benefits of lowering deuterium in the body. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water is 100% safe and non-toxic. In fact, it's the closest in structure to the metabolic water that your mitochondria produce. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water comes in 5 or 10 parts per million glass or plastic bottles, so level up your health by leveling down your deuterium today. The purchase link is in the show notes, and use code Dr. Sara for a discount off your order?
There's 3 ways to measure iron status in the body. There are 3 blood tests that you can do. And the first, and the one that's been used the longest, is hemoglobin. And so hemoglobin is like a bucket. And we know how big a bucket is. But 70% of our iron is tied up in hemoglobin. Another 10% is tied up in myoglobin. So that's in the muscle. But all of those proteins are holding oxygen. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. So there's this big bucket of iron that is represented, and your hemoglobin is 12.1. Well, that is within range, but it's at the low end of the range. And it's nothing to be worried about. I actually like to see the hemoglobin on the lower side, just because I think people have been skewed over the course of their lifetime to keep bumping up that hemoglobin. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And there are a number of iron biologists that really schooled me up about that in terms of what they brought forward in their articles. But your hemoglobin is within range, but it's a little on the low side. And that's okay. I'm not at all concerned about that. Your red blood cell count is fine at 4.32. It's a very healthy expression of red blood cells. And just to reinforce what I think we talked about before, every second of every day, we need to replace 2.5 million red blood cells, because they only live so long. They live 120 days. And so the spleen is taking 2.5 million offline every second, and the bone marrow is bringing them online simultaneously, which is absolutely staggering thought to think about that rate of production. But your red blood cell count is absolutely perfect. Then there are some markers that people probably have seen or they may have heard of, but they've always wondered, where did they come from? And so you have MCV, MCH, MCHC. And those are dealing with different expressions of hemoglobin. And then there's a fourth one called RDW, red cell distribution width. And these 4 markers were actually the brainchild of a hematologist named Max Weintraub, who's originally from Canada, got his medical degree north of the border, then came to Louisiana to get his PhD in physiology, ends up at Hopkins for a number of years here in the States, and then becomes the dean of medicine and really starts the medical school program at the University of Utah back in the 1950s. And he crafted and created these tests to better understand the dynamics of what's happening to our blood. And I think one of the challenges we face is that practitioners, I don't think they know where energy comes from, but they don't know where blood comes from. They don't know how it's made. They don't know how to best evaluate its maturation or its turnover. But what when the MCV, MCH, or MCHC are on the low side, it's an indication that copper status is compromised. When RDW gets too high, that's another sign, clinical sign of copper deficiency. When did RDW become a real issue? During COVID. The RDW was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was actually a team at Hopkins who figured that out, that this condition, whatever it was affecting the maturation process of red blood cells, wasn't allowing them to produce enough energy to shed the excess iron. It's fascinating to think about how it actually unfolds. And the RDW was getting bigger and bigger. And that was a clinical sign of this condition. Your MCHC is just slightly on the low end of the range, but your MCHC is marked as low. And again, it might just be something to be mindful of, that maybe you do need more copper in your diet or in your supplement routine. Again, it's nothing, people, when they present these results to me, they think I'm going to read them like tea leaves to try to predict your future.
But also,
No,
before I used to eat a lot. I haven't eaten any liver since I got to the US, and I also tried to give up dark chocolate like Lindt. So I would say those are the two like
there we
most
go.
copper dense foods.
That's so
But
funny. Oh, that's great. You gave up liver and dark chocolate? What's
well,
wrong?
I didn't mean to. I mean, there's a shop I can buy. I just bought heart from, and it's kind of harder than I thought to get lamb's liver. But then, since doing these, I've already had a sneak peek because I had these for a while. I thought, oh yes, I'll just reintroduce. But I would just say for people, normally, you know, I'm a big fan of sort of liver and other things. So yeah, if we carry on, so would you say, just to recap, because I'll put pictures of this up so people can see. So the MCV at 90, that looks like it's in range, but would you say it could do with being lower?
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. I think
Okay.
that the MCH is just on the low end of the range.
Okay, and you want MCH to be sort of slightly higher. It's because the thing is mine's 27, 28.7, and then the 27's the cutoff, and then 33 is. So would you
Right.
do you want MCH to be slightly higher?
Yeah, ideally these markers for hemoglobin should all be around the middle of the range.
Okay,
I
okay.
typically,
And then MCHC, that's 31.7. Ideally, I want to bump that up a bit to something like 33 or 34.
exactly. That's exactly right. And it's
Okay.
amazing with a little bit of copper, how long or how far copper goes into restoring this process.
Okay. Yeah, we've got a good experiment because I've already reintroduced the copper foods. So here's my retest of MCHC, and as you can see, it's now going up and it's back in range. You said for the RDW, this is a one where you don't want it too high. So mine's at 13.8, but would you say that I want to sort of push it back down to about 11 and a half, and definitely don't let it go any higher,
Well,
and keep an eye on it?
I think it's actually okay where it is.
Okay.
What you don't want it to do is get above the range.
Okay, like 15 is the cutoff. Yeah.
When it gets above the range, you know you've got someone who's struggling to mature their red blood cells
Okay.
because they don't have enough energy in the erythroid uh, maturing process.
Okay, that's really helpful because these red blood cell tests, this is like an FBC, like a full blood count. So people in all over the world, this is very simple, and often that these just arrive, people just get them by themselves. Well, one more thing I wanted to highlight is hemocrit, because I know if men take testosterone replacement, their hemocrit gets really high, but that's just the one marker in here we haven't talked about.
Yeah, what the hemocrit is shorthand, it's 3 times hemoglobin.
Right,
What it's telling you is what percent of your blood is iron. That's
right.
really, and I'm trying to see what your
Mine's 39.
39. That's very good. That's fine. When I first began to take these blood panels seriously, it was actually Dr. Liz who said, you've been talking to a lot of people about their iron status. Have you checked yours? This is back in 2015.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that's a good point. So I went and did a blood test, and my hemoglobin was 18.3. My hematocrit was, it was over 50%. And it's just like way too high. And by the grace of God, I was able to donate blood, because if it had been 18.5, they would have said, can't take it. It's too much iron.
All right. So which one? I'm just which one was? Because what did you say your hematocrit was? I called it the wrong thing before. Yeah. So how that's the one for. If we just go back to the picture,
Yours is 39. Yours is 39.1.
and what was yours that when it was too high?
Mine was over 50. I think it was like 52%.
Oh, right, okay, that's massive because that's really off the charts, and I've seen quite a few of those off the charts with. And it's I know how in males who've used hormones that can push hematocrit up. Is that just something as people age and accumulate iron that's one place in a lab that it would appear
It
as
will appear. And what people need to understand is the reason why you're taking testosterone pellets is you have too much iron, and iron is affecting a very important hormone called sex hormone binding globulin,
okay.
which is triggering aromatase enzyme, and it's turning your testosterone into estrogen. And that's why you're taking the pellet, is because you have too much iron in your body. The doctor doesn't understand that. And what is the testosterone? What's the TRT, the testosterone replacement therapy, doing? It's doing two things. It's further increasing your iron, and it's shrinking your gonads. And people don't know that. And they need to understand that there's a price to pay. What we've got to do is manage the iron, not manage the number of the hormone.
Okay.
We've got to get into the iron.
I've just pulled up some more labs. So I did everything. So for my testosterone, and my sex hormone binding globulin is 47.5. And then my testosterone's kind of fine. So in picograms per mil, that's free. It's 1.9. And then the testosterone total is 17 nanograms per deciliter. But this is women and do TRT sometimes. But again, they still, if they start doing TRT, all of the factors we just talked about with a man would also apply. So what would you say about we can ignore the testosterone because it's sort of not what we're talking about, because you homed in on saying the sex hormone binding globulin. And this is a really easy lab to get as well. So, because so maybe you want to just talk about that in the context of iron and hormones, because again, for people listening and building a lab panel, I think that's really useful.
What people need to understand is that these steroid hormones that we're so conversant in are all responding to the oxidative stress in our body.
Mm-hmm.
They're designed to, they're signaling peptides. They're very smart, and they're responding to how much oxidative stress is there. And we need to understand that copper is the master antioxidant mineral. It's supposed to be inside ceruloplasmin, which is the master antioxidant protein that has over a dozen different functions, enzyme functions, to try to manage the oxidative stress. Well, if copper is MIA, if ceruloplasmin is not filled with copper, it doesn't function right. And that is then going to function and affect your hormones. And what we're being trained, like circus bears, to do is focus on the hormones and ignore the minerals and the antioxidant enzymes. And what we're really trying to emphasize here in this discussion, Sarah, is get people back to the basics of how the body really works. And it's minerals that run and regulate the body. It's hormones that respond to the oxidative stress. And what do they move? They move minerals. That's their job. And so we've been trained to think in hormone language, when in fact the body's designed in mineral language. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely, because it's like the minerals turn the key and the copper is the car. Sorry, the copper and the minerals turn the key and the hormones the car. It would be, yeah, like and then it goes off somewhere and does something.
Most doctors are trained. Think of the jaguar. What's the hood ornament of the jaguar? It's this beautiful, chrome tiger, or leopard, I guess it was, or jaguar, of course. But the doctor thinks that the minerals are a hood ornament, when in fact they're the engine that runs the car. That's what people need to understand, is that minerals are incredibly important. They're not just some hood decoration. So back to the blood test.
Yeah.
I'm going to do the iron part,
Yeah.
and then I can do the rest of it.
Yes.
But what's interesting is that your serum iron changed. It went from 109 in April to 49 in May. Ideally, it should be around 100 would be a good number for people to shoot for. And I was curious to know, do you have a sense of what might have precipitated or influenced that change?
Oh, right. Yeah, because when I came to stay with Sarah Kleiner, obviously the weather's completely different here because it's like a really hot summer. So I came from the UK. Then because we're kind of busy a lot, I ate less red meat because it was too hot. We didn't feel like it. We had more seafood or things like that. Then, like I said, I couldn't find somewhere to buy liver and I was eating heart instead. Then I tried to cut down on dark chocolate because it's just not fair on her daughter if we eat treats in front of her. Okay. And then it's kind of dropped. But I think it's a really interesting thing because I'll also have like a third reading, because with these labs, I know how to read them myself, but you obviously have always an extra spin on it because you've seen so many. So it's purely way more sun. And I know iron in its own way interacts with the sun, but I would just say it's just purely just not eating as much iron from natural foods. That's all it is.
Well, that's fine. Great explanation. What people need to understand, again, back to the three different ways to measure iron in the blood. So we had the bucket of hemoglobin. Well, serum iron, so that bucket is like 80% of the iron. Serum iron is only 1% of the blood,
Right.
but it's a very important 1%. So I call it a thimble. It's a thimble of iron, but it has a lot of value, because what it's telling us is what's happening to the iron recycling program at 2.5 million times a second is a very critical metronome to say, is the body in regulation? And for the women in the audience, the best time to do a blood test to really find out what your iron status is across the board, assuming that you're still menstruating, would be on day 15 of your cycle. That's typically the best time, because you're going to have a more balanced read of iron status at mid-cycle, as opposed to the beginning of the cycle or the end of the cycle.
Okay, yeah, because also that's just after ovulation. I can find out. I always track everything of periods and cycles, and I have run lots of labs at funny times in cycles. But then I'll just make a note of that, so it's on day 15. But that would make sense.
Yeah.
So then, oh, just one thing I remembered of why is the iron different? I've sweated a lot more than, and you were saying that iron can leave through sweat, but I think you're meaning the unbound, unpleasant iron, not the iron we're talking about here, the iron in the thimble in the blood.
I have a feeling what might account for the difference is a different point in your cycle.
Yeah, that could be, yeah.
That would be my prediction, but I could be wrong. There's a very small amount that's lost through sweat.
Okay.
But what people need to understand is that there's only one really recognized way to lower iron content in the human body.
Right.
That's through loss. Either through a menstrual cycle or through a phlebotomy, through blood donation.
Okay.
There's no enzymatic, there's no hormonal regulation of iron levels. So we've got the
so it won't just go out by itself if you stop putting more in.
But a small amount will come out through sweat. A small amount will come out through what are called the squamous cells of our digestive tract.
Yeah, so poop. Yeah.
Very, very small amounts. Very, very small. So then below iron is something called TIBC, total iron binding capacity. And what that's telling us is the number of docking stations in the iron docking stations in the blood that can hold iron. It's really what it's telling us. And yours is 367, which is exactly where it's supposed to be. And then I have a way to check that. Is that TIBC is a function of your transferrin protein. And what's transferrin? It is the transport protein. So when we're breaking down the blood cells in the spleen, iron that's free needs to be attached to transferrin to get it back to the bone marrow in our long bones. And the tissue in the body with the strongest attraction to iron is the bone marrow. The bone marrow macrophages have this incredible and insatiable attraction to iron, thank God. And so the transport protein, transferrin, carry iron, transferrin, is going to take that iron back. And that number ideally should be 30. And what's your transferrin? 29.9, which is it's showing up as 299 in the blood test, but I moved the decimal point over because I like to be able to compare it to ceruloplasmin, which only has 2 digits.
Okay.
Well, your ceruloplasmin is 30. The transferrin is 29.9. And that's perfect symmetry inside the body. That's exactly what you're looking for. And the reason why these 2 proteins are so important is they are the first line of defense in our immune system. because they're keeping iron away from the pathogens.
Mhm.
And they play very powerful roles in that respect. And there's a way that you can validate and verify that your transferrin is okay. You can take the number for TIBC and divide it by 12.5, and the number that comes out is 29.6. So your TIBC is exactly where it's supposed to be. Your transferrin is exactly where it's supposed to be. And that just gives you a sense of just the symmetry in the body. And then we look at your percent saturation. And what that's revealing is it's the serum iron divided by TIBC. And when you divide 49 by 367, you get 13%. Now, a classically trained conventional practitioner would say, "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry, you're anemic." And that's absolutely not the case. And I think your serum iron is down because of your cycle.
Yeah.
Your TIBC is absolutely perfect. And I don't really get stressed out when I see someone's percent saturation is low, because I'm not worried about low iron. I'm worried about high iron.
Oh, because with the percent saturation low, that sort of just means there's plenty of parking spaces available.
Exactly.
Whereas if all the parking spaces were full, it means there's probably lots of iron trying to park in them.
That's exactly right. No,
Yeah.
you have it. So again, we've got the bucket, the
Mhm.
thimble, and now we're going to talk about the teacup. And the Brits love their tea, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so teacup does not hold as much volume as a bucket. So it's about 10% of the iron in the body is tied up in what's called serum ferritin, and it's an iron storage protein. Now, from 1865 to 1972, all physicians and people, pathologists and people who are studying blood, all relied on hemoglobin. Everything changed in 1972. Jacobs et al., they were actually Welsh hematologists publishing an article in the British Medical Journal. And they said, let's move the spotlight away from hemoglobin and let's put it on ferritin. And that was a very dangerous thing to do because it distorts the importance and the signaling that ferritin gives us. The ferritin protein is supposed to be inside the cell. It's not supposed to show up in the blood. Very, very important to understand that. And when I was chatting with Douglas Kell a number of years ago, who at that time was at University of Manchester, now I think he's at University of Liverpool, I asked him point blank, I said, what's the ideal ferritin for a human being? And he said, 0. And I almost fell out of my chair. He said, Morley, I want to make sure you understand this. Rising ferritin in the blood is not a sign of iron vitality. It's a clinical sign of organ pathophysiology. That's a very powerful statement. He said, now, do you understand what I just said? I said, absolutely do. I've read your literature. I really appreciate you saying it so succinctly. And what I shoot for, he said it should be 0. I've never accepted 0 because he has more degrees after his name than a thermometer. I don't. And so I have to be very careful about what I say. So along with a number of other practitioners who are much more, I would say, enlightened about iron situations, I'm sort of in the looking for ferritin to be around 20 to 30. And I'm okay with it going up as high as 50.
Oh, I see ferritins of like over the goalpost is way too big for this. I've seen people with 400, 300, you know, loads of the time over 100. Yeah.
Oh, it'll go into the thousands.
Oh,
And most
really?
doctors,
Yeah. That's like bad.
most doctors won't even pay attention to it.
Mhm.
And even when it's in like 3 or 4 or 5,000, that means that there's an organ that's absolutely on fire with inflammation.
Mhm.
And what's really happening is the iron can't be recycled properly within that tissue. Again, iron's carrying oxygen, the waiter. And once it does that, it needs to be recycled into either heme or into iron sulfur clusters. And when it can't do that properly, because there's very sensitive chaperones that are moving the iron within the cell, they're all copper dependent, ding, ding, ding. And so when the iron can't be moved properly, iron gets discharged into the tissue. The ferritin protein gets cleaved of about 10 amino acids, and then it gets secreted into the bloodstream as a sign that there's something wrong. Organ pathophysiology. It could be the liver, it could be the spleen, it could be the kidneys, or the three principal organs that will begin to spew out ferritin. And it's been grossly misunderstood. And there are some world-renowned hematologists, Rosio, Warwood, who worked with Jacobs, a number of other famous hematologists, who talk about serum ferritin as empty shotgun shells. They're not a sign of iron vitality. They don't express, oh, you're doing well, everything's fine. It's a complete misunderstanding of this particular blood mark.
That's really interesting, because people sometimes say to me, oh, I've got low ferritin, how do I raise it? And I just said, you don't want to do that, because it's also the goalposts are so skewed. So I accidentally sort of bring the labs back.
No,
up.
and
Yes.
so we have the bucket,
Yeah.
the teacup, and the thimble. And your bucket is right within line. It's a little on the low side. I think that's actually good. Your teacup right where it's supposed to be. And your thimble is a little low. There could be dietary factors. As you said, you're sweating more. I also think it might be where you are in your cycle.
Yeah,
so then we come to you had B12 and B9.
Yeah, that's not that. I just happened to put those in. They're kind of not part of this story, but I think I copied and pasted it because I wanted to show you the retinol, the vitamin A.
Yeah,
but
no, I think it's fine. So people need to understand that one of my theories is that all of the B vitamins are copper dependent and that they regulate iron. It's really their job. They're very much involved in iron metabolism. So I posed this with a world-renowned copper expert, Leslie Clavet, who I'm sure we talked about in our first conversation. And this many years ago, and Dr. Clavet is very diplomatic, and he said, well, Morley, I can't speak for all the B vitamins. He said, I'm intrigued by your theory, but I can't speak for all the B vitamins. He said, well, what I can tell you for a fact is that folate, B9, is copper dependent. Well, that was a galvanizing comment. And so B9 status gives you an indication of how copper is in the body. The symptoms of B12 deficiency and the symptoms of copper deficiency are virtually the same. Now, people may have heard of the fact that B12 has an intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor. That's like the word lesion. What does lesion really mean?
Isn't the intrinsic factor like a way to shuttle the B12 safely through the gut so it doesn't get damaged, like a Knight of the Templar is escorting somebody?
I love that. That's a wonderful analogy. Well, it turns out that the name of the intrinsic factor is cubilin. Cubilin. Well, you know my habit of hyphenating words, so it's Cu-bilin. It's got to be copper dependent.
Right.
And so if copper's down, the transport mechanism, the Knights Templar, isn't there, and the B12 can't get into the tissue. Very, very important.
Oh, no, that's really interesting. Like it's a copper chaperone, but also vitamin B12's got cobalt in it. It's like a cobalt center. So how do cobalt and copper interact with one another? Or is that how the copper protein, the intrinsic factor, interacts with the B12 and carries it? And that's for studies for us to do later.
I think that B12 from a test tube has cobalt. I think B12 from an animal has copper.
Right, okay.
I challenge this idea that cobalt, out of all the metals, why would suddenly we have this emphasis on cobalt in B12.
Oh, what? So you
Doesn't,
think in the pyrrole ring naturally that there's more than one form of B12 in the body, and we make one with copper in the pyrrole ring rather than cobalt, and cobalt being in there is something that's been generated by
right.
supplement cover, because you can get you can get cyanocobalamin and methylcobalamin. Right. That's a really interesting idea.
B5, pentothenic acid.
Yeah.
Prior to 1941, it had copper in it.
Right.
Merck Laboratories changed it, and now you can look on every supplement bottle, and you'll see D-calcium pentothenic acid.
Right.
They've replaced the copper with calcium.
Okay.
It changed its properties when they added calcium and took copper away.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I keep telling people there are so many different forms of these B vitamins and things that you take, and you can't just you have to know a bit about biochemistry to know the form. But that just reminded me of something else, because didn't B12, a synthetic version, not get invented until the 1960s or 50s? So anybody in the past who didn't get enough B12 from their way of eating or had pernicious anemia would have passed away. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I think is relevant is we look up to people who get a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
Right? So three physicians from the States, I believe one from Harvard, two from Hopkins, used the same product to cure anemia and pernicious B12 anemia using the same product.
Yeah.
And what was it? It was beef liver. They gave a Nobel Prize to three physicians for using beef liver to solve anemia and B12 anemia. Well, that's a very important fact to understand, because it becomes a cornerstone to question the narrative. Say, wait a minute, maybe this diet thing is really important. Maybe I've got to be really careful about what I eat. If they're giving Nobel Prizes a generation ago, or 2 generations ago, and again, the average person's not going to know about that.
But also, I come across lots of people who tell me they're plant-based and they have all these B12 supplements and injections, and they're just getting worse. So there's something different about the B12 that comes in the liver with all of the other whatevers. Absolutely. And also there's B12 in other animal produce as well. So whatever people put in the injection or put in the supplement isn't, and like you said, maybe the cobalt isn't supposed to even be there in the first place. So again, people should really question. Yeah.
We need to ask better questions. We need to demand better answers. And I think people get so fixated on learning what they see on the internet or what they hear from their neighbors or their doctors or whatever. And they're like, maybe we should spend more time making sure we understand what the truth is. And I think there's enough signs of disinformation and deception that it's time to really question them.
Oh, definitely. Because the thing is, I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else, and neither are you, because we've got a science degree. But every day, I get sucked into things, and I'll listen to a podcast or read something, and for a given amount of time, believe it, and then think, hang on, just go and read for yourself. And I can do that, because luckily I can read scientific papers most of the time. But it's something that people just watch. They have a favorite influencer. They just get snapshots and bullet points from Twitter or Instagram, and all of a sudden they think they know everything about nutrition, and it's completely warped, and they've never read a scientific article in their life, and their favorite influencer they're following has never read a scientific journal. So you don't need to have a degree to read these papers, and anybody can learn how to read them, or just make the effort to read. And I think that's a really important point, that you just have to be so careful of where you get the information from. But also, people cherry pick and misquote scientific data all the time to fit their narrative as well.
Absolutely. No, it's very, very important to understand that. And so, working our way through the remaining markers, we've got vitamin A.
Yeah, I did my own calculation, because it's meant to be 3 times your storage D, which I forgot to give you, which was 29 when I ran this.
So you're just under 2 to 1.
Yeah.
And I like to see the vitamin A around 65. The vitamin D should be about 21. And I know that flies in the face of what people think.
Yeah, we can have a whole podcast on the great vitamin D debacle.
I love that. That'd be fun. So people need to rethink. They need to rethink vitamin D, but they need to think about retinol.
Mm-hmm.
Retinol, vitamin A, animal-based vitamin A, it's very different than beta carotene. but that animal-based retinol is what makes copper bioavailable.
Mhm.
There's two very important pumps, copper pumps in our body, and they have the names ATP7A, it's called Menkes, ATP7B, called Wilson's. And the Wilson's pump is what loads copper into ceruloplasmin. The Menkes pump is what loads copper into all the other copper enzymes, of which there are dozens. No one's ever heard of these. And so what fires up those pumps is retinol when it gets conjugated, when it gets converted into retinoic acid, especially 13-cis retinoic acid for the gearheads out there who want to know, give me the granular detail. And it's very important, but I've only read it in one article.
When you said gearheads before in an interview, I didn't understand. I thought it because it's a gear to us in the UK would mean steroids or smoking weed. But do you mean like nerds? Do you mean people?
Nerds, absolutely.
Yeah, the
People,
geeks. We'd say for the geeks. When I first heard this is for the gearheads, because we obviously have explanations for my mum Mary in Wales and Nancy in Missouri. But then when you say gearheads, you mean the Dr.
absolutely.
Pollocks and the nerds. Yeah, yes.
People who really want to get down to they want to see what wheels are working with what wheels.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the nerds and the geeks, a geek fest. Yes.
Yeah, because they're going to keep asking, but why? But why? By why?
But also vitamin A and retinol, back to sunshine, there's so many other forms and you need sunshine to activate them all as well. And because I want to defend vitamin A, people will tell me, oh, I ate in this particular protocol based on somebody telling me to do it, and then I didn't feel good and I got vitamin A toxicity. So I said, okay, well, can I see some labs? And obviously they never speak to me again. There's a silence. So just on the converse, so just with my lab, because people can see it, it's 49. You would say I should aim really for 60, which is, that's great. We know plenty of animal-based retinol foods. How can people do this wrong by over supplementing or eating liver to excess or eating too much butter? What happens when it goes the wrong way?
And I don't know that I've ever seen an uber high retinol.
What about if people take vitamin A supplements? Because they're just one form, and that's all sorts of other problems, which are, and isn't it the vitamin A supplements? And also, didn't people eat husky livers once and died from some kind of poisoning? And that's where the vitamin A phobia toxicity came from. Or have people eaten too much beta carotene and made themselves sick? I had a person who did that and turned orange.
Right. No, that does happen. That can happen. It's very rare. But the synthetic form is usually retinyl palmitate. And you'll say, well, that's a naturally occurring. It is when the body makes it, not when the test tube makes it. So that's a very important factor. What people don't realize is that copper is very much involved in retinol metabolism. That's important to know. And that you don't want to be eating polar bear meat.
No.
You don't want to eat polar bear liver because it has an outrageous level of retinol in that liver. Well, no one in their right mind would do that. And so we have to be quick to question. What I find fascinating is the number of people who believe that copper is toxic, that vitamin A is toxic. They absolutely believe that.
But then they stuff themselves full of vitamin D and zinc and think that's not toxic. It's just stupid. And I just lose patience every day. I'm just a bad-tempered old woman now about it, because it's like, for goodness sake, everything's a seesaw. And can you not see that you've been manipulated? Because how can you possibly have one more important than the other? And then people get really upset at me if I make any kind of video about vitamin D supplements being bad, attacking me. And I'm just trying to help them. And it's the same. It's like, it's the logic of it so stupid. It's like, okay, I must stuff myself full of this chemical vitamin, but this one's toxic, and then they do the same with zinc. Sorry, I just had to get on my moral high horse. I'll climb back off it now.
No, I absolutely love it, because I've been fighting this battle for 50 years, and people don't realize how we've been brainwashed about vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D, and no mention of retinol, vitamin A. And in fact, when you only take vitamin D, and we'll talk, I think we really should have.
Yeah,
a
we will do,
separate
because it
kind
needs a whole podcast, the vitamin D, because it's kind of against the paradigm. Because this is, again, I'm just going to get on my moral high horse again. People go on about being awake and, you know, conspiracies, and then they're stuffing themselves full of vitamin D. We're not going to mention the poke or the J word or the C word, but then they're saying, oh yes, I'm an idiot and this, that, and the other, and then they're stuffing themselves full of zinc and vitamin D, and it's like, hang on, that's just another conspiracy. This is just another cash pig, and you've fallen right in for that, laughing at people who, for whatever reason, got pushed into having the thing, and then people who caught the whatever it is, the virus. But then back to what we were saying, I'll climb back off again, because I know we're ending soon and we've got a few more labs to look at, but I never get mad about much, but for some reason this really irritates me so much. And the more I've learned about your work and talked to you, you've obviously got all of the evidence and the information in the background, and you've been at this a lot longer. So anyway,
again, what we're doing here is we're reorienting people that copper, bioavailable copper, especially as it's expressed through ceruloplasmin, this copper protein, is the focal point of our physiology. It's the altar that we should worship at. And what makes copper bioavailable is retinol.
yeah,
What stops vitamin A uptake in our digestive tract is too much vitamin D supplements. It's a binary uptake mechanism, and vitamin D blocks vitamin A from getting into the body. We'll talk more about that, but it's important for people to begin to question their sacred cows, if you will, about this supposedly sunshine vitamin, and we're going to find out it's not quite so rosy.
exactly.
So then we've got.
Oh yeah, I think we for the labs we've got ceruloplasmin still to do, but you've mentioned that earlier, and then we've got the magnesium, RBC, zinc, and copper serum.
Exactly. So your magnesium RBC is 5.2, and that's right at the bottom of the range. It's within range. It's very normal for people to have a mag RBC that low. All that tells us, Sarah, is you're a stress cadet. You know, you're a mom with kids. You're living out of your country. You've got all sorts of things going on. You're trying to earn a living, things like that. Having to put up with the craziness of the world. But
I have to put up with leaf blowers in the US.
Yeah, right.
Honestly, yes, it's
it's terrible. It's absolutely horrible. But the range should be 5 to 7. Ideally, it should be about 6.5.
Okay, so the range here given to me by Quest is misleading, because it tells me I'm about in the middle, whereas from what you've said, I'm at the bottom of the range, and actually we should shift these goalposts up to 7.5 and aim for 6.
7.0. So 5.0 to 7.0.
Okay.
And I like to see it around 6.5.
Okay.
And when it's this low, what it tells us is we have an iron problem. That you can drink bucketfuls of magnesium, and until you address the iron side of the house, your magnesium is not going to come up.
Okay.
Then we come to zinc, and zinc is 69, and that's on what I would call the low side. Most people are around 80, ideally max around 100. When it's high 60s like this, here's the magic of what's happening. When copper is down, iron's going to rise. When iron is rising in the liver, as it will, as we get older especially, when iron's rising, it's going to cause magnesium loss. It's going to show up in the mag-RBC.
But also, we concluded from my other iron labs, I don't have a massive iron load. So like you said, for me, it's another cause of magnesium loss of stress. So yes, I'll let you carry on. Yeah.
But what's important for people to know is that when the liver is trying to get through its functions, it's got about 500 enzyme functions. Many of them require a mineral with a +2 valence. And what the liver likes most of all is magnesium. Well, if magnesium's not there, it's going to start to use zinc, which is another mineral with a +2 valence. And so the zinc will look low in the blood because the liver is using it. And the mistake that's commonly made by practitioners is they'll see a low zinc on the blood test, tell the person to take zinc supplements, not knowing that the zinc is going to increase the production of metallothionein,
Hmm.
which is a metal binding protein, and it binds copper 1,000 times stronger than it binds zinc. And so that's why one of the stops in the RCP is stop taking zinc supplements. Let's focus on the copper. Let's focus on the retinol. Let's focus on the critical minerals that are making energy, and stop responding to these overtures about, oh, your iron is low, your calcium is low, your zinc is low, because they are signs of metabolic imbalance. They're not signs that you need to start supplementing with those supplements.
Okay.
And then we can,
That's a really good, because I interrupted you mid-flow. Do you want to just maybe go over that just again? Because I accidentally interrupted you about, so what we had with the zinc and the magnesium, that we were on the zinc is on the low side, but then you said as iron starts to accumulate. Yeah.
So when iron starts to accumulate, there's going to be loss of magnesium to the iron-induced oxidative stress.
Right.
Then the liver is going to start grabbing zinc because it's available. And the zinc is going to start to look low in the blood. But the best way to get your zinc restored is through your diet, especially meats, oysters.
Oh yeah, seafood. I eat shellfish and seafood.
Okay, so then you're fine. And then we come to the granddaddy of all, which is copper and ceruloplasmin. And yours is spot on. Your copper is at 101. Your ceruloplasmin is 30. Again, we're looking for symmetry between ceruloplasmin and transferrin. Transferrin was 29.9 using the decimal point lunar, and your ceruloplasmin is 30. And the ratio is 3.33, and that's considered ideal. Now, what we don't know, Sarah, is the ceruloplasmin protein. There's two ways to measure it. We can measure its level, and we can measure its activity.
Yeah.
Its IQ.
Mhm.
And here in the States, I don't know who the governing body would be worldwide, but here in the States, the FDA only allows us to measure the level or the height of ceruloplasmin. We don't know what its activity or IQ is. And so it's a critical missing factor in understanding the physiological health and vitality of the individual. If we knew what the ferroxidase enzyme function was, we'd have a completely broadened understanding of how well they're managing their iron, which is ultimately creating the oxidative stress in their body. So your ratio is ideal.
Yeah, that's great. That was brilliant. This was so good what you've just done, and I think it's like a kind of a place we could end here, ready for round 3. And and by the time this gets posted, I probably will have run another full Monty, so there'll be things people can see how quickly stuff changes, because in my own head I know how to fix the labs are very minor, and the last thing I would do is rush out and take vitamin A or zinc supplements, and it's very minor, the little tweaks, because like you said, it's like I can test for in my cycle, and also there are some other things, because in your protocol of things not to do, which I don't do the things you don't. There was a few things I was doing, and then there's obviously your protocol. So maybe we could leave it for here today, so that you don't give away all your gems in one sitting. And
okay.
For people who've really enjoyed all of this, it's in your book as well, that the ranges, everything sort of explained. So definitely, if you like this, if you get Morley's book, you can sit down and read it and sort of absorb everything, and then we have our video where we sort of discuss it. So this was excellent. I really appreciate you doing this, and I hope that we can get the message out. So what are we going to do in part 3? Are we going to do the debunking the vitamin D debacle?
That'd be great. I think that'd be great. And then maybe at some future point, as the sessions begin to get some mileage, people are going to have questions.
Yeah.
And then we can have a real interesting dialogue about responding and answering those questions to reinforce these points, because it takes several bites at the apple to reorient people to what's really running the body, because they've been trained for so many decades, and they don't realize that it's all a narrative. It's
I
not
know, I
based
just
on.
call it an echo chamber of bullshit. That's what my word
Okay.
for it is. And then because of all their colleagues live in the echo chamber of bullshit, no, but they all reinforce each other. And it's the same with publications. People can peer review each other and make echo chambers of bullshit in PubMed because it's all friends just backing each other up. But that's for another sort of discussion. What about Jim Stevenson Jr.? He's a good person for people to look at with vitamin D.
Absolutely. Again, he's actually a PhD electrical engineer, mechanical engineer.
Oh, that's good
With
because people try and tell me, oh, he's a citizen science, and I said, no, he isn't. He's got a degree, and a PhD, but it's just not in biology.
not in biology, but he's brilliant.
Oh,
And his
yes.
wife almost died from vitamin D overdose.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
he wanted to find out why. And now I would say he's the preeminent authority on vitamin D on the planet.
Oh, yes,
And
absolutely. I love him. I love that interview you and him did together with Stephanie. That was brilliant, or Steph. But, you also know a vast amount. So I think we'll end on this, that we're going to talk about the vitamin D dangers, debacle, debunking because of Jim Stevenson's wife who nearly died from overdose. And I think that's really serious. And that's why I got so annoyed earlier in this podcast about the vitamin D and the A and everything, because it's like we say, it's serious. But once again, I really appreciate your time and your brain and your book, Morley.
happy to have the conversation and look forward to our continued dialogue.
Thank you very much for watching. Part 3 is already recorded, and Morley goes even deeper into the mineral and copper puzzle, and he actually talks about melanin, all sorts of things, so stay tuned for that. I just want to thank my sponsors, Lightwater, because they've been a massive help in me pushing this channel forward. And actually, Victor from Lightwater is going to be hosting a conference at some point, and he's invited me to go, and Dr. Cruz and Dr. Pollock are also hopefully attending. If you're interested in learning more about hormones and labs, then check out my hormone workshop and use code COPPER for a 15% discount.